While the entire world was absolutely captivated by America's Apollo missions in the 1960s, a series of terrifying experiments were silently taking place on our neighboring planet, Venus. The Soviet Union, or the Russians, launched a multi-billion-dollar suicide mission to Venus. After years of relentless work, they built a probe designed to become the first human-made object in history to land on another planet and capture photographs. But what the Russian probes encountered on Venus was a literal hellscape that completely blew the minds of the Soviet scientists. Welcome to another video from Voxen TV. If you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button. It's the easiest way to keep us bringing you more. Today, we are going to dive into Russia's suicide missions to Venus that expose the planet's horrifying secret. How did a tiny camera lens cap destroy years of work and billions of dollars? And what exactly did they find there that has completely stopped Russia from ever going back, despite having vastly superior technology today? During the 1960s and 70s, the Cold War was at its absolute peak. The United States and Russia were locked in a brutal race to see who would become the undisputed king of space. Both nations were desperate to pull off a monumental achievement that would prove their ultimate power and capability to the rest of the world. In this race, America put everything it had into reaching the moon. While Russia had technically already won a part of this race by crashing the first probes into the lunar surface, U.S. President John F. Kennedy boldly promised the world that America would land a human on the moon before the end of the decade. It was an incredibly massive claim. When the Russians realized that America might actually pull it off, they shifted their crosshairs to Venus. Their goal was simple. If America can walk on the moon, Russia will walk into hell. Up until this point, scientists genuinely believed that Venus and Earth were practically identical. They are neighbors, roughly the exact same size, and sit at a similar distance from the sun. But there is one massive, visible difference. Unlike Earth, Venus is entirely suffocated by an incredibly thick layer of cloud. At the time, humanity had absolutely no idea what was hiding beneath those heavy clouds. It was a complete mystery box, even for the most brilliant scientists. Russia figured that since the moon could easily be seen with a telescope, showing the world what was hidden beneath the clouds of Venus would be a much bigger achievement than landing on the moon. And if those clouds were hiding oceans, lush forests, or even alien life, it would be an absolute, indisputable victory for the Soviet Union. Driven by this thought, the Russians planned a staggering 18 separate missions to Venus. They named the probe designed for this monumental task Venera, which is simply the Russian word for Venus. At the time, the only thing scientists knew for sure was that the presence of thick clouds and its proximity to the sun meant Venus definitely had an atmosphere. But nobody had any idea just how thick or crushing that atmosphere actually was compared to Earth's. So they engineered the Venera probes to withstand incredibly high atmospheric pressure. During the space race, the Russians had a strict policy of keeping all their experiments completely top secret until they were successful, desperately trying to avoid the global humiliation of a public failure. On February 4th, 1961, Russia launched its very first probe toward Venus, but it completely failed to even break out of Earth's orbit. Sticking to their policy of secrecy, they never told the world about the failure, simply lying and claiming they had just launched a heavy satellite. Another Soviet policy was to always build 2 identical probes for every single mission, just in case the first one failed. This time, they built Venera 1 and Venera 2. The goal was simple: perform a flyby of Venus and collect as much data as possible as they whipped past the planet. On February 12, 1961, Venera 1 launched. It became the very first probe in human history sent toward another planet. But just 7 days after launch, it completely lost contact with Earth. The result: this silent, dead probe flew about 62,000 miles past Venus, but couldn't send a single piece of data back. It is actually still blindly drifting somewhere around the sun today. 4 years later, on November 12th, 1965, Venera 2 launched, but it met the exact same fate. The moment it left Earth's orbit, the signal died, and the mission was a total failure. Throughout the 1960s, Russia made several other attempts that failed so miserably they weren't even given the Venera name. In space race history, these are known as the ghost missions. Then came Venera 3 and 4 in 1966. This time, the Russians built massive, incredibly powerful probes that weighed a staggering 1 ton each. They were divided into 2 sections. A bus designed to carry the probe to the planet's outer atmosphere, and a sphere designed to plunge deep into the planet itself. This sphere was packed with sensors, a barometer to measure pressure, a gas analyzer to figure out what the atmosphere was made of, thermometers, heavy-duty batteries, and 2 massive antennas to beam all that data back to Earth. Venera 3's only mission was to analyze the atmosphere. There was absolutely zero intention or capability for a soft landing. It was a complete suicide mission. But tragically, the second it hit the violent winds of Venus, its entire system failed, and it couldn't send a single byte of data back to the Russian scientists. It ended in a fiery crash landing. However, on March 1st, 1966, Venera 3 officially became the first human-made object in history to physically strike the surface of another planet. The following year, in October 1967, the Russians finally tasted a bit of success with Venera 4. It successfully reached Venus, and without any system failures, it revealed that the planet's atmosphere was overwhelmingly composed of carbon dioxide. Initially, the Russians proudly claimed that the atmosphere of Venus was 25 times thicker than Earth's, and that Venera 4 had successfully touched down on the surface thanks to its parachute. But the horrifying truth came out later. Venera 4 was literally crushed like a soda can by the insane atmospheric pressure before it ever even reached the ground. Once the Russians realized their probes couldn't survive the brutal descent to the surface, they launched Venera 5 and 6, with the sole purpose of dying in the air. Their design was identical to Venera 4, equipped with parachutes, and they only had about 50 minutes to collect and transmit data before being destroyed by the crushing atmosphere. Both probes launched in 1969, and the result was exactly the same. They were completely crushed and destroyed in mid-air within an hour, long before they could send any substantial new information. But the Russians simply refused to give up. This time, they built Venera 7 to be an absolute indestructible tank. It was so incredibly heavy and solid that it had only one purpose: survive Venus. To make it as strong as physically possible, they stripped out almost all the scientific instruments, but Venera seemed cursed. During the descent, a technical glitch jammed its switchboard, meaning it could only transmit temperature data. But the Russian scientists were so brilliant that they used that single temperature reading to mathematically prove that the atmospheric pressure on the surface of Venus was 90 times greater than on Earth. That is the equivalent of being over 3,000 feet deep in the ocean. As Venera 7 plummeted toward the surface, disaster struck again. Its parachute completely shredded, and it slammed into the ground at a terrifying 38 miles per hour. The good news was that Venera 7 actually survived the impact. The bad news was that it landed completely upside down, pinning its antenna directly into the dirt. But the Russian scientists didn't quit. They managed to pick up the incredibly weak, distorted signal. Broken, battered, and upside down, Venera 7 maintained contact with Earth from the surface of Venus for 23 agonizing minutes. It became the very first human-made object in history to successfully land on another planet and transmit a signal back. But the temperature it recorded on the surface sent chills down the spines of the entire world. It registered an apocalyptic 869 degrees Fahrenheit, more than twice as hot as a conventional oven. Another mind-blowing discovery happened while the probe was falling. As it constantly beamed radio signals back to Earth, scientists noticed the probe was being violently shoved to the side. This movement caused a slight shift in the radio frequency, a phenomenon known as the Doppler effect. By calculating this shift, they discovered that the atmosphere of Venus was tearing itself apart with massive 224-mile-per-hour hurricane winds. That is significantly faster than the most catastrophic hurricanes on Earth. Venera 8 was vastly more advanced than any previous mission because the Russians finally knew exactly what kind of horrifying monster they were dealing with. 90 times the pressure, 200-mile-per-hour winds, and temperatures hotter than an oven. Venera 8 was equipped with a gamma spectrometer to test the soil and a light sensor. And unlike Venera 7, which landed in the dark, they intentionally landed Venera 8 during the day to see just how much light actually penetrated those thick clouds. The light sensor confirmed that despite the incredibly dense cloud cover, enough sunlight scattered through to make the surface visible, very similar to a heavily overcast day on Earth. Venera 8 miraculously survived on the surface of Venus for a full 50 minutes, surviving for nearly an hour under that insane pressure and an 860-degree heat was nothing short of an absolute miracle of engineering. The era of Venera 9 through 12 marked Russia's greatest triumphs and its most frustrating strokes of bad luck. The design of these 4 probes was completely overhauled. They looked like massive, bizarre UFOs weighing over 5 tons each. In the center was a spherical titanium pressure vessel designed to protect the incredibly delicate electronics from the instant destruction of the heat and pressure. The bottom featured a specialized crush ring designed to absorb the brutal impact of the landing, and the top featured a massive aerodynamic brake shaped like an umbrella to slow the probe down before it hit the ground. These probes were equipped with the one thing everyone was desperately waiting for: cameras. Each probe had 2 cameras to capture a full 360-degree view of the alien landscape. But at the absolute last second, a ridiculous error occurred. After landing, the lens caps simply refused to pop off. On Venera 9 and 10, only one camera cap opened. Venera 11 and 12 miraculously survived on the surface for an incredible 110 minutes. But tragically, not a single lens cap opened on either probe. They transmitted massive amounts of data, but absolutely zero picture. But on October 22nd, 1975, Venera 9, using its single working camera, beamed back the very first photograph from the surface of Venus. It was an incredibly historic moment, a human-made machine transmitting an image from an entirely different world. The world finally saw the truth. Venus wasn't a sandy desert. It was a terrifying, barren wasteland covered in sharp, jagged rock. Then came Venera 13 and 14, the spectacular grand finale of the Soviet Union's golden era in space. These missions showed the world things humans had never seen before, but they also featured a bizarre, almost comical mistake that is still talked about today. These probes weren't just equipped with cameras, they also had microphones. When Venera 13's microphone was activated on the surface, it recorded something incredible. For the first time in human history, we heard the sound of alien winds and thunder from another planet. It was also equipped with a drill and a seismometer, which collected enough soil data to prove that Venus experiences Venus quakes. Venera 13 also transmitted the very first color photographs of the surface, revealing that Venus has an orange sky and a brownish, desolate landscape. But what happened to Venera 14 will leave you speechless. It was equipped with a specialized, spring-loaded arm designed to violently strike the ground upon landing to measure the exact hardness of the alien soil. But when the camera lens cap popped off and fell to the ground, it tragically landed in the exact spot where the testing arm was programmed to strike. As a result, instead of measuring the hardness of the Venusian soil, the multi-million-dollar instrument spent its entire mission measuring the hardness of its own discarded lens cap. Millions of dollars and years of work were completely wasted by a tiny piece of metal. Moving forward, Russia completely changed its strategy for Venera 15 and 16. Instead of trying to survive the hellish surface, these probes spent 8 months safely orbiting the planet. Because the clouds of Venus are so thick that no normal camera can see through them, these probes were equipped with synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. Using this advanced radar, they spent 8 months meticulously mapping the entire surface of Venus. These final missions finally pierced the veil of those thick clouds, revealing that this hellish planet is home to towering 5.5-mile-high mountains and massive cracks stretching for thousands of miles. It is entirely because of these Soviet missions that we have a complete map of Venus today. While the US may have initially brushed off the Venera missions as failures, it is entirely thanks to the Russians that we know the horrifying truth about Venus. It is hotter than an oven. The pressure is 90 times greater than Earth's. The sky is filled with clouds of highly corrosive sulfuric acid. Violent hurricane winds constantly tear across the landscape, and the ground is covered in sharp, jagged rock. During the space race, the Soviet Union launched so many missions to Venus, some secret, some public, that many people still jokingly refer to it as the Soviet planet. In fact, many of the valleys and craters on Venus are officially named after Russian scientists. Here is a question for you. If the clouds of Venus are made of sulfuric acid, why does the acid rain never actually hit the ground? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed this incredible story. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching Voxen TV. If this story was worth your time, drop a like and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps us grow. See you in the next one.